What if the only way to escape is to forget who you are? When Elijah Carter takes a winter assignment in the forgotten town of Cold Hollow, he expects quiet days and snowy nights. But what he finds buried beneath the frozen earth is far older and far hungrier than anyone could imagine. As voices whisper through the trees and reflections no longer behave like they should, Eli realizes this isn't just a haunted town, it's a ritual, and it's his turn. Welcome to a story where memory isn't safety, it's bait. The first thing Ethan noticed as his rental car rolled into clear waterfalls wasn't the biting cold or the gray layer of frost clinging to the bare trees. It was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that blankets small towns in the early morning, but a weighted, unnatural hush. Like the town itself was holding its breath. He slowed down past a rusted, "Welcome to Clear Waterfalls" established 1891 sign, half buried in snow, and pulled into the narrow parking lot of the brick schoolhouse. It stood at the far edge of town, hemmed in by a leafless forest and a sagging chain-link fence. The building looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1950, faded red brick, green window frames, and a black bell tower that leaned slightly to one side. Ethan stepped out, boots crunching the icy gravel. The wind cut through his coat and stung his ears as he grabbed his satchel and approached the main door. A handwritten sign in thick white chalk had been scrawled across the wooden door. "Read the rules, obey the rules, or it will choose one." The message was written directly onto the red paint, smeared at the edges like a child's trembling hand had drawn it. He hesitated, hand hovering near the handle. This wasn't supposed to be anything unusual, a temporary assignment from the regional school district to evaluate the mental and academic conditions of a rural school following a recent teacher resignation. A week, maybe two. Interview staff, observe the students, write a report. Instead, he was greeted by cryptic chalk warnings. The heavy door creaked as he pushed it open. The interior was dark, lit only by strips of pale fluorescent light flickering overhead. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, lined with rows of hooks holding worn winter coats and boots far too small for any adult. The air inside was musty, tinged with the smell of old chalk, mildew, and something else, something like copper. Ethan moved down the hallway until he reached the main office. A secretary in a thick cardigan sat behind the glass window, typing slowly into an ancient-looking desktop. "Ethan Graham's district-appointed evaluator," he said, flashing his badge. She glanced at him without smiling. "You're late. The principal's in room 2. The woman pushed a small clipboard through the sliding tray beneath the glass. It had a printed list titled "Classroom Safety Protocols, Clear Waterfalls Elementary." The header was formal, but the rules beneath were anything but. "Never erase the chalkboard before 3:13 p.m. Don't turn off the hallway lights. Ever. Ignore the 8th desk. It isn't there. If a student hums, hum back. They're checking. Close all windows before sunset. Lock them twice. If you hear someone knocking after class, wait 37 seconds before answering. No one leaves during roll call, even substitutes. If you forget a rule, pray, but not out loud." The list was unsigned. No district seal, no contact number. "This is a joke?" Ethan asked. The secretary didn't respond. Room 2 was at the end of the corridor. A faded sign read "Principal Harrow," the lettering barely legible. Ethan knocked once, then twice again before slowly opening the door. The principal stood at the window, staring out toward the snowy playground. His back was rigid, hands clasped behind him. He didn't turn. "You've read the list, I hope," Harrow said without greeting. "I have. Is that some kind of local tradition?" The principal finally turned around. He was tall, pale, with deep lines carved across his face like someone had etched worry into him with a knife. His eyes, however, were sharp, alert. "No tradition, no joke. Those rules are the only reason we still have most of our students." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Something wrong with the heating?" he asked, nodding toward the principal's shivering frame. Harrow ignored the comment. "You're here to observe, so observe. But remember this, You are a guest. Guests who break the rules don't stay long. Some don't leave at all." There was a long pause. Then the principal said almost softly, "The children are different here." Ethan spent the next hour walking the halls, making notes, and observing the classrooms. The students looked ordinary enough, bundled up in mismatched sweaters, boots still drying by the radiators. Most kept their heads down, eyes on the teachers or their desks. But then came room 9. Something felt off. The chalkboard at the front of the room still had lessons from the previous day, long division problems, vocabulary terms, and, at the very bottom, a set of initials circled in white chalk, E. Ethan frowned. Those were his initials. He glanced at the teacher, a petite woman with a nervous smile who didn't seem to notice. Then he noticed the seating. There were 8 desks, arranged in 2 neat rows of 4, but only 7 children sat there. One desk in the back, directly beneath the flickering light, was empty. He didn't know why, but his eyes kept drifting toward it. He blinked, and for half a second, he thought he saw a shadow move within the outline of the chair, like someone was sitting there and simply chose not to be seen. "Excuse me," Ethan asked the teacher, "is this the full class roster?" "Yes," she replied quickly, 7 students. "But there are 8 desks." Her face twitched. "We don't talk about the 8th. "Why?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and began writing equations on the chalkboard with hurried, shaky strokes. Her knuckles were white around the chalk. The students were all watching Ethan now. One of the boys, a pale child with red hair and hollow cheeks, slowly began to hum a melody. Soft, low, familiar. "Rockabye Baby on the Treetop." The others joined in, one by one, never louder than a whisper. Ethan felt his skin crawl. The lights buzzed. A breeze brushed his neck, even though the windows were closed. The chalkboard suddenly cracked down the middle, a long, jagged line like a lightning bolt splitting the lesson in half. He turned back toward the 8th desk, and now the chair was pulled out, empty, waiting. Ethan stood frozen. The room had gone completely still. The humming had stopped. The children were staring ahead like mannequins, eyes glassy and unfocused, mouths slightly open as if mid-prayer. The only sound now was the steady tick of the wall clock above the chalkboard. Then the light above the 8th desk flickered once, twice, and burned out. The air shifted, not colder. He was already numb from the drafty corridors, but denser, heavier, like the pressure in a plane before a storm. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His fingers tingled. He blinked. The chair was no longer empty. A girl sat there now. At least, she looked like a girl. Pale skin that shimmered slightly under the fluorescent light. Hair so dark it almost absorbed the color around it. Her dress was outdated, something from the 1960s, maybe, with a frayed collar and a small brooch shaped like a bell. Her hands were folded neatly on the desk, but her face, there was no face. Where her features should have been, eyes, nose, mouth, there was only smooth, stretched skin, almost like wax paper pulled taut across a mask. Ethan's mind fought to process it, his instincts screaming this isn't real. The teacher hadn't moved. Neither had the children. Ethan stumbled back, bumping into the doorframe. The faceless girl tilted her head slowly, almost curiously. Then, without warning, every child in the room turned to look at Ethan, perfectly synchronized. They opened their mouths and began to hum again, "Rockabye Baby in the Treetop." He backed into the hallway, heart pounding, nearly slipping on the linoleum. The humming grew louder, deeper, layered, each voice slightly out of sync, like an off-key choir. Ethan yanked the door shut and ran. He didn't stop until he reached the front office, lungs burning. The secretary was gone. The hallway lights began to flicker. The rules on the clipboard, he'd left it on the counter, were now erased. Only a single chalk message remained on the wall behind the desk. "You've seen her. You're part of the list now." The bell above the building rang once. a loud, jarring clang that echoed through the walls. Ethan burst out the front door into the freezing air, gulping down the bitter wind like it could wash the memory out of his throat. His hands trembled as he fumbled with his keys, but the rental car wouldn't start. The engine whined, stuttered, died. He tried again. Nothing. He looked up. Across the lot, standing just beyond the chain-link fence, was the girl in the dress. Still, faceless, head tilted. The brooch on her collar caught the dying light of the afternoon sun. She didn't move. Ethan threw the door open and ran. Through the lot, past the sign, down the road. He didn't stop until he reached the diner he'd passed on the way in. It was nearly empty inside. Just a waitress stacking menus and a man in a sheriff's uniform nursing a coffee at the far booth. A jukebox in the corner buzzed quietly, but no music played. Everything smelled like burnt toast and something metallic. Ethan stumbled to the counter. "I need a tow truck," he panted. "My car won't start. Something's wrong." The waitress raised an eyebrow, but didn't look alarmed. "You came from the school, didn't you?" He froze. "How do you—" She nodded toward the sheriff. "He'll want to talk to you." The sheriff didn't look up from his coffee. "Car won't start," he said quietly. "Let me guess, you saw something that doesn't make sense. Maybe a child that doesn't exist?" Ethan nodded slowly. The sheriff sighed. "You should sit down." "I'd rather sit down," he said again, firmer this time. Ethan obeyed. "There are things in clear waterfalls that don't belong in any report," the sheriff began. "Things that been here longer than any of us. The school is just where it likes to start." "It?" "We don't know what to call it. We just call it her." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "She's older than this town. Maybe older than the people who first came here. Some say she was the daughter of a settler who vanished in the blizzard of 1874. Others say she was never human at all." The sheriff took a slow sip of coffee. "We try to keep her contained. The rules help, so long as no one breaks them." "She appeared in the classroom," Ethan interrupted. "The 8th desk." The sheriff's hand stopped mid-air. "The 8th desk," he repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "That desk's been moved, burned, dismantled. Always comes back. You saw her there?" "Yes." A long pause. "Then you need to listen very carefully now, because tonight around 3:13 a.m., she's going to test you." Ethan blinked. "Test?" The sheriff leaned closer. "She doesn't just haunt places. She haunts people. And if you look at her too long, or if you forget a rule," he tapped the side of his head, "she finds a way in." Ethan stood. "I'm not staying," he said firmly. "I'll find another car. I'll walk out of here if I have to." The waitress glanced up, something like pity in her eyes. "You can try," she said. "But Clear Waterfalls isn't just a town. It's a circle." Ethan stared at her. "What?" "You'll always come back," she said quietly, "even if you think you've left." He stepped out into the cold evening. The snow had started again. Thick flakes, slow and heavy. Far off, from the direction of the school, the bell rang a second time. And somewhere behind him, just beneath the wind, a child's voice hummed a single line. "And down will come baby, cradle and all." By the time Ethan reached the motel, the snowfall had swallowed most of the road signs. His boots sank into powder up to his ankles, and his breath came in ragged clouds. The glow from the neon sign flickered in the distance. "Timberline Motor Inn." Half the letters broken or buzzing. No other cars in the lot. No other footprints but his own. He stepped inside, the doorbell jangling sharply in the silence. No one was at the front desk. Just a dusty bell and a yellowed corkboard behind the counter covered in old ads. Missing pets, garage sales, a flyer for Midnight Chapel Revival with a date from 3 years ago. The place smelled of mildew and reheated coffee. He rang the bell. After a moment, a door creaked open behind the desk and an old man emerged. It's wiry, gray, and too quiet. He didn't speak as he slid the guest book forward. "I just need a room for the night," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. The old man handed over a key. No ID, no form, no small talk. Room 7. Ethan hesitated before heading out again. Do you know what's going on in this town? The man stared at him with clouded eyes. Then, in a voice that sounded like gravel on glass, he said, "Don't dream with the lights off." Ethan didn't ask for clarification. He just walked. Room 7 was at the far end, its door warped from years of weather. Inside, the wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the radiator made a sound like distant laughter every time it clanged. The bed was lumpy, the sheets thin, but it was shelter. He locked the door, pulled the heavy dresser in front of it for good measure, and sat on the edge of the bed. His fingers trembled as he took out the notebook he used for field notes and began scribbling. Rule 1, don't leave desks empty. Rule 2, don't make eye contact with her. Rule 3, the circle brings you back. Rule 4, never sleep with the lights off. He paused, then, underneath the last line, he added, there is no outside. At exactly 2:37 a.m., something tapped at the window. Ethan shot upright, heart hammering. Tap, tap, tap. He approached slowly, step by step, until he could just make out a pale outline beyond the frosted glass. A shape. Small, childlike, standing too still in the snow. He pulled the curtain slightly. Nothing was there. The street was empty. No tracks. No child. Then came the humming. Not outside, but from the vent above the bed. Rockabye, baby. The sound was so soft, he almost mistook it for a trick of his ears. But no, he knew that melody now, knew it like a scar. He backed away from the vent slowly, but then the light above him flickered, once, twice, dark. His hand fumbled at the nightstand lamp. It wouldn't turn on. Then the radio crackled to life. Not music, a voice. A child's voice. Ethan? He froze. Ethan, you left your desk empty. That's not allowed. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Frost began to form on the inside of the window. The lamp buzzed and hissed with a faint electric pop. He turned toward the bathroom mirror. For a split second, just a blink, he saw himself seated at a school desk. Then the reflection changed back, his face pale, sweating. But a knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. He didn't move. Then a child's voice whispered from under the door. Open the circle, Ethan. We're all waiting. He didn't sleep. He sat in the corner of the room, the light from his phone screen dimming every few minutes as he forced himself to stay awake. By morning, he looked like he had aged a decade. The snow had stopped, but the motel lot was still empty. No cars, no people, not even birdsong. And yet, the front office was open again, and the old man behind the desk acted as if nothing had happened. You said something last night, Ethan muttered as he checked out, about dreaming. What did you mean? The old man didn't look up, just muttered under his breath, dreams are how she finds the door. Ethan left without pressing further, but as he opened the car door, his car, now somehow starting perfectly fine, he saw something in the side mirror that made his blood run cold. His reflection didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at him, smiling faintly and mouthing the words, "We're all in the circle now." The road back to town seemed longer than before. Ethan drove slowly, eyes darting to the tree line. The pines pressed close to the tow-lane road like watching figures. Shadows shifted between the trunks, but when he looked again, there was only snow. His GPS still refused to load, stuck on a frozen screen that said loading route. He wasn't sure why he kept driving. Maybe to see if he could leave. Maybe to prove the rules weren't real. But 5 minutes into the drive, something strange happened. Again. He passed a faded green road sign. Welcome to Cold Hollow. He blinked. He had just left Cold Hollow. A minute later, welcome to Cold Hollow. He hit the brakes. There was no turnoff, no detour, just straight road and that same damn sign. He got out of the car, boots crunching into the icy shoulder. The wind bit into his face like needles. He approached the sign cautiously, as if it might disappear when touched, but it was solid, rusty bolts, faded paint, cold to the touch. He turned around, and behind him, further up the road, the motel, Timberline Motor Inn, again. As if he had never left. Ethan backed away, palms clammy. His car was still there, engine idling, exhaust curling like smoke from a funeral pyre. "I'm still here," he whispered. The circle had pulled him back. The third rule. Back at the library, the front doors were already open. Snow trailed inside in a perfect line, as if someone had walked in barefoot. But no one had swept it. No footprints, just melted arcs and curved loops, like something had slithered. Inside, the temperature was lower than it had any right to be. Breath visible. The bookshelves stood like frozen sentinels. He walked to the reference desk and found something sitting where he'd last placed his notebook. Not the notebook. A Polaroid photo. He picked it up slowly. The picture showed the library's main hallway. Same angle as from where he stood now, but there was something in the picture, something not there in the present. A woman, standing at the end of the hall, not just standing, staring straight into the camera. She wore a long black dress. Her face was pale, eyes hollow, and her mouth was stretched in a way that shouldn't have been possible, like a smile pulled too far, too tight, written in marker along the bottom. "She watches the desks you abandon." Ethan dropped the photo. It landed face down on the floor, and then a voice, thin and sharp, echoed down the stacks. "Where were you, Ethan?" He spun. No one, just the echo. Or something worse. The lights flickered. Once, twice, then they dimmed to a faint red glow, as if the emergency backup had kicked in. But it hadn't. The power wasn't out. It was the library itself that had changed. The books began to whisper, not pages turning, whispering. He stepped between the aisles, heart hammering, and then he saw it again. A figure in the reading room, the same woman from the photo, standing between the chairs, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. She was closer this time, still smiling, still staring. Ethan ducked behind the stacks, hands shaking. When he looked back, she was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just the red glow and the whispering books. Then came the bells, soft at first, like wind chimes, then louder, rhythmic. Ding, ding, ding. He knew the sound, school bells, and as they rang, the air changed. He smelled chalk dust, old wood, crayons, the scent of elementary school. And when he turned again, he wasn't in the library anymore. He was in a classroom. Empty, but familiar. Too familiar. The chairs were tiny, the walls decorated with faded alphabet charts and peeling paper snowflakes. At the front of the room, a blackboard bore the same sentence, over and over again. "I must not leave the desk." Over 100 times. The desks were all occupied by mannequins, each one dressed like a child. Still, silent, eyes made of buttons or nothing at all. And yet somehow, Ethan could feel their attention fixed on him. He turned, and there was his desk in the front row. The nameplate said, Ethan M. Holt. He sat. He didn't mean to, his body just moved, as if something old and half-remembered had taken over. Then, from the intercom above the chalkboard, "Class, say hello to Ethan." All the heads of the mannequins turned in unison, and from their mouths, not sewn shut, but stretched open, came a whisper. "Hello, Ethan." He tried to stand, couldn't. His legs wouldn't move. The desk was holding him, the chair too. It felt like stone now. And then came the voice again, the same as before, her voice. "Your desk was empty. That's not allowed." He struggled, sweat pouring from his brow. The classroom grew colder. The chalkboard erased itself. New words appeared, slowly. Punishment required. And then came the footsteps. He heard them behind him. Click, click, click. He screamed and twisted. But there was no one. The classroom was gone. He was on the floor of the library, gasping, freezing. A sharp pain in his chest. He scrambled up, ran toward the exit. The front doors were still open. Snow fell harder now, swirling like ash in the wind. And on the sidewalk, where his footprints should have been, there was a circle, drawn in salt and bone and black wax. Inside it, his name burned in red. Ethan Holt, returned. He didn't look back, didn't speak. He just walked, but he knew now, the circle doesn't let you leave, not for long, and next time. It wouldn't just bring him back, it would bring something with him. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the motel bed with all the lights on, a steaming cup of instant coffee turning cold in his hands. The TV played static even though he'd turned it off hours ago. In the mirror across the room, his reflection blinked half a second too late. At 3:13 a.m., the snow outside stopped falling. At 3:14 a.m., it started rising, not swirling in the air, but literally rising off the ground, defying gravity like dust in reverse. It hung suspended like ash in water, frozen midair, glinting faintly in the motel's parking lot lights. Then, just as suddenly, it collapsed to the earth, and all around him, the motel creaked like it was breathing. Ethan clutched the leather journal he'd found tucked into the library's locked drawer earlier that day. He hadn't opened it yet. It smelled like old leather and dried herbs, bound with a brittle strap of sinew. On the cover, etched into the material, was a strange circle with 5 intersecting symbols. None of them he recognized. In the center, a small red X, no title, just one phrase in faded ink on the first page. The ledger of those who could not forget. Beneath that, a list of names, pages and pages of names, dozens, maybe hundreds, each with a date of entry and a date of disappearance. And then, halfway through the book, he found it. Ethan M. Holt, arrival, February 5th. Entry logged by curator, status, yet to be claimed. He stared at the page, the ink still wet. His name was already there, and someone or something had been waiting. He flipped back to earlier entries. Many of the names came with notations. One stood out, Lucy Fairbanks, remembered the ash beneath the trees, claimed on 6th return. Eyes removed. Another, Jason Nosleep, broke the 4th rule. Whispers crawled in, claimed mid-sentence. There was no 4th rule in the notebook. Only 3. He searched the pages for more rules, more context, but the rest of the book seemed to shift when he looked too long. Words bled together, sentences rearranged. Some pages simply vanished, as if pulled into the spine. Then, the motel phone rang. He stared at it, unmoving. It rang a second time, a third. He picked it up. A click, then breathing. Wet, shallow breathing, like someone drowning very, very slowly. Then a voice, a woman's, whispering. "They're writing your name again." You left the desk. Ethan slammed the phone down. His hand shook, his coffee spilled. He had to know who else had seen this. Had to know if any of the names in the ledger were real. He opened his laptop, praying the motel Wi-Fi wasn't just decoration. It connected. Slowly, he began typing in the names from the book. One by one. Some turned up nothing. No record, no obituary, no digital footprint at all, like they'd been erased. But a few had news clippings, archived articles. High school librarian Lucy Fairbanks reported missing after strange vandalism incident. Date, February 1979. Witnesses said she locked herself in the reading room. When police broke in, they found only the words "Do not erase" scrawled across every surface in black ink. No body, no blood, just that. And salt. In a perfect circle. Local historian Jason R. Lee found dead in Cold Hollow archives. Date, February 1993. He had been cataloging local ghost stories. His last written note said, "Rule 4 is to forget the first 3. Ethan felt the motel close in around him. He looked down at the journal again. The red X on the cover had changed. Now it pulsed. He didn't know if it was blood or ink. but he knew it was time to go back. He needed answers. And the library, the one place that seemed to exist between times, between rules, was the only place they might live. He dressed quickly, grabbed his flashlight, and walked out into the night. The snow had stopped completely. No wind, no sound. The world was a painting, held still by something watching from behind the brush. The town square was empty. Every house had its curtains drawn. Not a single car moved. It was like the whole town had frozen at the same second. But the library was open, lights on, waiting. He stepped inside. The warmth hit him first. Unnatural warmth, as if the air had forgotten it was winter. Then he saw the desk. The same desk from the classroom vision. The nameplate was back. Ethan M. Holt. But someone had added a second line, scratched in with a knife. Stay this time. A light flickered overhead, and the whispering began again. But this time they said his name again and again. From the stacks, from the walls, from inside the journal. He followed the sound deeper into the library, past the reading room, past the archival hallway, toward the basement, where the town's records were stored, and where he hoped he'd find the curator, whoever, or whatever, had written his name in the ledger. But when he opened the basement door, he didn't find darkness, he found a mirror. Massive, floor to ceiling, no dust, no sign of age, and inside it wasn't his reflection. It was him, yes, but older, worn, eyes sunken, covered in ash. And behind the older version of himself stood the classroom, the mannequins, the woman in black. She placed a hand on Miriam's shoulder and smiled, then turned to look out of the mirror, at him. And the last thing Ethan saw, before the mirror shattered into salt, was his name, scrawled backwards across the glass. Claimed. The shards of the mirror hadn't fallen. They hung suspended in the air like frozen raindrops, glinting faintly with a sickly green sheen. Ethan stumbled backward, expecting glass to slice into his skin, but nothing touched him. Instead, the world shifted. The library's basement blinked away. The wood beneath his feet gave way to wet stone, slick and uneven. The walls pulsed, breathing like lungs made of stone and moss. A low hum vibrated through the air, more felt than heard, like something enormous moving behind the walls. Ethan stood in a corridor carved from black granite veined with red. Torches flickered without flames. The air was heavy, metallic, laced with something rotten, something old. He turned to find the door behind him gone. Only a narrow hallway remained, stretching endlessly forward. Then came the whisper again. Familiar. Return what you opened. He stepped forward. The walls tightened. The floor groaned. He passed an archway etched with symbols he'd seen only once on the cover of the ledger. In the center of the symbols, a crude carving of a faceless figure, arms outstretched, mouth open wide in silent scream. He couldn't stop looking at it. The deeper he moved, the more impossible the corridor became. The floor was sloped upward, but he felt himself moving downward. Time unraveled. His watch spun erratically. His breath echoed before he exhaled. Then, finally, a chamber. In the center of the circular room stood a desk, old, wooden, warped by moisture and time, and behind it, sitting as if he'd been waiting for years, was a man, or what looked like one, tall, gaunt, wrapped in dark robes embroidered with sigils that shimmered like oil in water. His skin was translucent, veins pulsed beneath like worms in glass. His eyes were holes, not black, hollow, emptiness itself. The curator. I've been waiting, the curator said, voice like dry leaves dragged across stone. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. You were written before you were born, the curator continued, just like the others. But you brought the ledger back. That changes things. He gestured to the desk, and Ethan saw the journal, his journal, open to the latest entry, his name. But now, next to it, claimed, pending Why me? Ethan whispered. The curator tilted his head. There is no why in remembering. Only cost. The moment you read their names, you invited them back. Ethan shook his head. This is insane. None of this makes sense. The living always say that, the curator replied. You called out. You broke the seal. You opened the classroom again. And now the forgotten will come. For you, for everyone who remembers. Behind him, the shadows on the walls began to move. Figures emerged, faceless, mouths open, eyes stitched shut. The forgotten. They reached out with withered fingers, their touch staining the air, pulling strands of light from the space around them. Ethan backed away. I didn't ask for this, but you were chosen, the curator said, not because you were special, but because you were weak enough to look back. The figures came closer. You can stop this, Ethan pleaded. There has to be a way. There is, the curator said, slowly rising. The ledger must be completed. Completed how? Names must be traded. For yours to be erased, another must be written. Ethan froze. You mean someone else? I have to give you someone else? One name, one truth, one offering. The curator placed a knife on the desk. It was ceremonial, obsidian blade, bone handle, still wet with blood that steamed in the cold chamber air. Carve their name, he said. Speak it, offer it, and leave. Ethan stared at the blade. Who? The curator smiled. You already know. Suddenly, Ethan was elsewhere, back in the motel room, alone, gasping. Cold sweat drenched his clothes. The journal lay closed on the nightstand. The TV was static again, and on the mirror above the sink written in condensation, one name. He stared at it for a long time, then picked up the phone. He called Haley. It rang once, twice, then her voice. Ethan? Hey, are you okay? You sound weird. He tried to speak. Nothing came. Ethan? He hung up, paced the room, thought of Haley's smile, her laugh, the way she made everything feel lighter when the darkness came creeping. She didn't deserve this. None of them did. He couldn't give her name, but another voice crept into his head, one he hadn't heard in years. Martin Chase, his old college roommate, the one who'd led Ethan to the cabin near Cold Hollow, the one who insisted on breaking in that night, the one who disappeared first, the one who started all of it. Ethan grabbed a pen, opened the ledger, and began to write Martin J. Chase. As the final letter dried on the page, the book snapped shut, and the room fell silent. No static, no whispers, just the hum of electricity, the tick of the wall clock, the world returning to its rhythm. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his reflection. It blinked at the same time now, but something in his chest ached. Something in his soul had shifted, and deep beneath the motel, in a corridor carved of stone and shadow, the curator smiled. As the forgotten turned to face their new offering, the ledger hadn't moved from the nightstand. Ethan had barely slept, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't trust what dreams might come. The motel room was too quiet now. No whispers, no static, just the silence of something lurking, waiting. The name was still there, Martin J. Chase, written in ink that now looked more like bruised skin than ink at all. He stared at it, heart heavy. He thought of the curator's voice, cold and precise. One name, one truth, one offering, but guilt didn't kill the thing growing inside him. Dread did. At dawn, he left the motel, not because he had a destination, but because standing still felt like an invitation to be swallowed. The world outside was gray, choked with fog. Autumn leaves clung to dying branches like regrets refusing to fall. He drove with no music, no calls, just the sound of tires on damp pavement and the occasional groan of the old sedan. His mind wandered where it shouldn't, to Cold Hollow, to the cabin, to the first name that had ever appeared in the journal. Cara Bell. That name still haunted him. She'd been his professor, folklore and occult symbolism. Brilliant, intense, a little too obsessed with rituals, buried in Appalachian myth. She'd disappeared 6 months before graduation. No body, no evidence. Just gone. And then he remembered. She was the one who first gave him the journal. It was part of a class project. Document and decipher an unpublished regional text. She handed it to him in a sealed box, said it was part of a recovered estate from a burned-out church in eastern Kentucky. He never questioned why she chose him. He should have. Ethan took a sharp turn off the highway. The sign read Sycamore Ridge, 6 Me. He didn't recognize the name until the 3rd mile. That's when memory clawed its way back. Kara once mentioned it, an abandoned mining town where one of the false awakenings had occurred. False awakening, a term she used for people who vanished, then returned, changed, hollow-eyed, fragmented, sometimes speaking in ancient tongues. Sometimes they never returned at all. He had to find the church. The town was barely there, just rusted signs, broken fences, and a general store leaning sideways like it was ashamed to still exist. But behind the overgrown brush, at the top of a muddy trail, was what he'd hoped for. St. Jude's Missionary Chapel. Collapsed roof, cracked bell tower. But still standing, he pushed open the warped door. It creaked like something clearing its throat after decades of silence. Inside, the pews were mold-covered and warped. Vines climbed the walls. The altar was cracked in two, but the smell, smoke, old blood, wet stone, was the same as the chamber below the curator's hall. There, on the left wall, behind shattered stained glass, was a mural. He hadn't seen it before. It showed a faceless congregation bowing toward a shadow behind the pulpit. The shadow had no features, just jagged limbs, a wide-open mouth, and hands that stretched unnaturally long, pulling something out of the heads of the congregation. Memory, or perhaps soul. Below it, a Latin inscription barely visible beneath soot and moss. Memoria devours, the memory devourer. He reached for his phone, snapped a photo. As the flash flickered, something moved in the rafters. Ethan spun, flashlight shaking. A shadow ducked out of view. "Hello?" he called out. His voice sounded wrong, muted as if the room didn't want to carry it. A soft rasp answered him. Not English, not Latin, something older. It came from behind the altar. He stepped carefully, feeling every creak underfoot. As he rounded the altar, he found what looked like a cellar hatch half covered in rotted hymnals. The rasping sound grew louder, more urgent, almost like pleading. He hesitated. The journal vibrated in his coat pocket. Not violently, just enough to let him know it wanted him to open it. He didn't. Instead, he pulled the hatch open. Darkness, cold and wet, a stone staircase spiraling downward. This place had a basement. Of course it did. He descended slowly, flashlight flickering. The deeper he went, the louder the whispers became. Dozens of voices. Children? Women? Men? All tangled in pain. And in the center of the cellar, hunched over a pile of something Ethan refused to identify, was a woman. Hair matted, clothes shredded, fingers torn and bleeding from scratching at stone. She turned slowly, and Ethan's breath caught. Kara, or what was left of her. Kara? The name left his mouth before he could stop it. The woman, if she still was that, blinked slowly. Her eyes were the same pale green he remembered from the lecture halls at Cold Hollow University, but now they shimmered with a glassy, feverish glaze, as if they'd forgotten how to focus. "Ethan," she rasped. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was more like something dead trying to remember how to be human. He stepped closer. Her body was frail, almost skeletal. She looked like she'd been surviving off dirt and memory. "Kara, what the hell happened to you?" She shook her head violently. "Don't say my name down here." "Why?" "Because it listens, the devourer. It learns names, and once it knows yours, it follows you home." Ethan's throat tightened. "The memory devourer," he said softly. "That's what it's called?" Kara winced at the phrase. No, that's what people call it. It has no name. It steals names. That's why I've stayed. If I leave, I forget. I've tried. I walked away from this place once. A mile out, I couldn't remember where I was going. 2 miles, forgot my own name. 3, forgot my body. I almost disappeared. She touched her chest, where a jagged brand had been burned into her skin. An old church sigil, warped beyond recognition. I anchored myself here, with pain, with rituals, but it keeps trying to feed. Ethan stepped back, hand gripping the journal in his coat. It's in here, isn't it? He asked. Kara's gaze snapped to the book. You brought that here? I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, she hissed. You brought the ledger into the chapel. That's how it spreads. That's how it crosses thresholds. Ethan opened it. The pages fluttered like wind caught in a cage. Then they stopped. Page 43. A new entry had appeared. Kara Bell, forgotten. Martin J. Chase, condemned. Ethan Ward, remembered. He froze. Kara stood slowly, every joint cracking as if from disuse. That book doesn't record what happened. It records what will. The longer you keep it, the more it writes. The more it writes, the more it becomes true. The air shifted. Somewhere deep in the chapel above, a bell that hadn't rung in 50 years let out a single hollow chime. Kara's eyes widened. It's here. A growl, low, wet, and ancient, rolled through the stone. The candles scattered in the cellar snuffed themselves out, one by one. Ethan pulled Kara toward the stairs, but her feet dragged. I can't go. I'm too tethered. You need to run. I'm not leaving you. You already did, Ethan, years ago. You left the moment you opened that book. Suddenly, the journal burned hot in his hand. He dropped it. It landed open. The ink began to bleed. Names unspooled across the pages, dozens at first, then hundreds. Sarah Lynn, hollowed Bryce Harmon, split Kara Bell, eclipsed Ethan Ward. Pending. The word pending blinked like a cursor waiting for command. Then, a line began to form underneath. Status, incomplete offering. Behind them, from the far end of the cellar, something moved. It didn't walk, it stretched. Flesh like smoke, limbs like questions, a face made of blurred recollections. A grandmother's smile, a childhood bedroom, the smell of winter and antiseptic. Things Ethan hadn't thought about in years suddenly flooded him. And the thing smiled. With his mother's voice, it whispered, You forgot her favorite song, Ethan. That's how it began. Ethan screamed. Kara threw herself between him and the devourer. No! She shouted. You don't get him yet. I hold the mark. Take me. The creature paused. The air around Ethan warped. Memory splintered. Time folded. He saw everything Kara had lived through. Her first ritual, the burning of her own memory so she wouldn't be hunted. The hundreds of names she etched into the chapel walls to keep them from vanishing forever. And then her final choice. She'd bound herself to the chapel to stop this thing from spreading. But Ethan had brought it a new path. Himself. A scream echoed above them. Not human. Something was clawing through the chapel roof. The devourer hissed and vanished. Smoke into cracks. Teeth into shadows. Kara collapsed. Blood leaked from her ears. I can't hold it anymore, she whispered. It wants you next. Ethan clutched her. Then tell me how to stop it. She reached into her coat and pulled out a pendant. A small silver tooth wrapped in old twine. Take this. Burn the ledger in the mouth of its source, the place where it was born. Where? Cold Hollow, she said. Under the lake, the foundation of the first town. Before it was covered up, before the flood. Her eyes went dull. She whispered, Don't let it write your last word. Then she was gone. Not dead, just absent. Like someone had erased her from the room. Only the pendant remained, and on the ground. The journal had flipped itself shut. The cover now bore a new title, scrawled in heat-blackened ink. The Offering of Ethan Ward. The drive to Cold Hollow Lake took Ethan 6 hours, but he remembered none of it. He only realized he'd arrived when the car sputtered to a stop beside a weather-beaten trail sign that read Cold Hollow, no lifeguard on duty. The air was colder here, sharper, as if the altitude was a little higher, the trees a little taller, and the silence deeper. The woods around the lake weren't inviting, they loomed. Pines so old their trunks were blackened, and their roots jutted up like fingers trying to claw their way back into the soil. The trail sloped downward through a tangle of fog and moss, ending at a battered wooden dock that reached out into water so dark it looked like it bled ink. Ethan stood at the shoreline, holding the silver pendant Kara had given him. It pulsed faintly in his hand, like a dying heartbeat. Beneath the lake's mirrored surface, he swore he could see faint shapes, twisting buildings, maybe? Old roads? But when he blinked, there was only water. He hadn't slept in 2 days. The journal was wrapped in cloth, tucked into his backpack. It hadn't opened on its own since Kara vanished, but sometimes, late at night, he could still hear the pages breathing. His goal was clear. Find the mouth of the devourer, the place where the ledger had first been born. Kara had said it was beneath the lake, under the foundation of an earlier town, one that had been deliberately flooded and buried decades ago. There was no dockhouse, no canoe, no rental shed, just a rusted metal ladder, bolted to the edge of the dock, leading down into the water. Ethan stared at it for a long time before climbing down. The cold swallowed him, his breath caught instantly in his chest, lungs shrinking against the shock. But he pushed down, further, deeper. The world above turned to a blur of light and sound, and below, silence reigned. 10 feet down, the lake opened up. The world changed. It wasn't just water anymore. It was memory. All around him, ghost buildings shimmered in and out of vision. Lampposts, sidewalks, a drugstore with a broken neon sign, a school bell hanging by a single twisted wire. He kicked forward, drifting past a drowned town preserved in shadows. Every window stared at him. Every house faced inward, toward the chapel in the center of the submerged square. That's where it had begun. He swam toward it. Time began to stretch. The water pressed in like a vice. The pennant glowed dimly now, showing the outline of the chapel door, crooked and half-rotted but still intact. When he reached it, the wood crumbled beneath his fingers like paper. He pushed through. The moment he entered, the water vanished. He was standing, dry, breathing, inside a version of the chapel that was both real and impossible. Walls warped like they were underwater, pews rotting in spirals, and stained glass windows that shifted when he looked away. At the altar stood a mirror, cracked, bleeding, no reflection, just pages. Dozens of pages falling from the ceiling like ash. They rained slowly into the mirror's frame, as if the glass were eating them, and then one of them stuck, caught on a jagged edge of the broken frame. Ethan walked forward. It was a ledger page. His name was on it. Ethan Ward. Bound. Memory level. Active. Offering status. In progress. As he reached for it, the mirror spoke. A voice like 1,000 familiar whispers overlapping. Childhood friends, professors, old lovers, dead pets. A lullaby his mother used to hum in the car. You're not here to destroy it, Ethan. You're here to finish the ritual. He jerked his hand back. The journal in his backpack rustled violently. He opened it. New ink bloomed across the center page. Burn me inside the mouth. And below that, or be written forever. Ethan stepped back from the mirror. The chapel shuddered. A shape emerged from the far wall, dragging itself across pews, with limbs that didn't belong to the same body. Flesh borrowed from memories, stitched from birthdays, funerals, stolen glances and family dinners. A being formed from fragments of lives forgotten. The devourer. It didn't attack. It waited. A single long finger pointed at the altar. The journal began to heat again. Smoke seeped from its spine. Ethan took a shaky breath and walked to the altar. He placed the book onto the scorched surface, the pendant next to it. The moment the silver touched the book, flames erupted. Not bright orange, but black fire, like negative light consuming reality. The journal screamed, not aloud, in his head. A spiral of every memory Ethan had ever known began to unspool. First loves, first fights. Every mistake, every quiet joy. His mother's humming, Kara's laugh. His childhood dog running across the autumn leaves. His own name, repeated over and over until it sounded alien. The book thrashed, curling inward like a dying animal. The pendant sizzled, melting into the spine. Then, the flames stopped. The devourer was gone. The chapel turned to ash, and Ethan fell, straight down into black water. Ethan awoke on the shore, coughing up water and blood. The sky above him was night black, but the stars were wrong. They swirled slowly, like a whirlpool overhead, constellations dragged into an unfamiliar geometry. His hands were trembling, fingers raw and blistered. The journal was gone, the pendant too, but something else had replaced them. A mark, etched into the skin of his forearm. Not a wound, not a tattoo. A brand in the shape of a spiraling root, burrowing inward like a parasite, and it moved. Slightly, as if it was alive beneath the surface. He sat up, lungs still aching. The lake behind him was calm again, still, as if nothing had happened. But Cold Hollow had changed. Lights flickered through the trees. Not flashlights or fire, but lanterns, swaying gently with no hands to hold them. And from the woods came whispers. Not voices, not quite, but impressions of language, thoughts spoken without tongues. Ethan stood, wobbling. A child stood at the tree line, pale, hair matted with moss, clothes from another century, no whites in her eyes, just deep black pupils that swallowed everything. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Ethan recognized her. From the photographs, Kara's sister, Millie, dead in 1974, drowned in the old town before the flood. But here she was, staring at him, mud-covered feet sinking an inch deeper into the soft earth with every breath he took. And then she raised one hand and pointed, not at him but behind him. Ethan turned. The lake had opened. A fissure had formed in the center of the water, rippling out like a spiral crack in a mirror. From it rose a spire of wood and bone. Driftwood twisted with antlers, sinew, and fragments of stone bearing carvings in a language he couldn't read. The mouth of the devourer had awakened. Millie was gone. He didn't see her vanish, only that she was no longer there. The lanterns in the woods winked out. The sky above twisted faster, and Ethan began to walk. His feet moved on their own, down the slope, toward the lake again, into the spiral. The water didn't resist him, it invited him. At the center of the spire was a door, wooden, blackened, marked with the same spiral brand now carved into his arm. When he touched it, it opened inward, revealing a staircase descending into the lake bed, but dry as if the spiral pushed water away. He descended, one step, then another. The spiral tightened. Each step down, his memory shifted. He couldn't remember his father's face, then his first day of school, then the taste of Kara's kiss. He began to panic, gripping the walls, whispering names under his breath to try and hold on to them. At the bottom of the stairwell was a root, not made of wood. It pulsed, breathing. It looked like it had grown from the bones of forgotten towns, chunks of concrete, rusted railroad spikes, children's teeth, a wedding ring still on a mummified hand. And at the base of the root was a throne, not majestic, primitive, twisted. And on it sat a man. No, a husk. He looked like Ethan, almost, a few years older, face gaunt, eyes milk white, veins spiderwebbed with black ink. His fingers ended in parchment. His skin bore the same spiral but fully bloomed across the chest. He smiled. "You came back finally," the husk whispered, voice like crumbling paper. Ethan shook his head. I don't know you. The husk stood. Bones cracked like splintering ice. You wrote me? It said. Ethan backed away. I didn't. You did, it hissed. Every time you tried to erase the memory, every time you lied to yourself about what happened to Kara. You gave me flesh. You gave me shape. You made me the root. Ethan's back hit the wall. She's alive, the husk leaned forward. She was, until the offering failed. The throne behind the root began to bleed black sap. The root pulsed faster, wrapping slowly around Ethan's ankles, wrists, spine. Let me show you, the husk whispered. It reached out. The moment it touched his forehead, the world fell away. He was back at the motel, back in bed. Kara was sleeping next to him. Then the night fractured. She was screaming. The mirror had cracked. Her eyes had turned to ink. And something Ethan had buried, crawled out from her mouth. The journal, bound in her skin. He had written her into it. The offering hadn't failed. He had made her the sacrifice. He gasped, ripping free from the memory. The husk was laughing, a sound like 1,000 pages burning at once. You're just like me, it said. You're already the next root, just waiting to bloom. Ethan grabbed the root at his feet and bit down, not out of logic, out of rage, out of desperation. It tasted like ash and ink and sorrow. The throne shattered. The husk shrieked. Everything went dark. When Ethan woke again, he was standing in the motel bathroom, face bloodied, mirror cracked. No root, no husk, no lake, just him. And on the mirror, written in handwriting not his own, the motel was silent, not the kind of silence that follows sleep, or one born from the dim lull of early morning. This was a calculated stillness, thick and deliberate, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Ethan stood at the cracked mirror, his blood dried across his cheek, the message smeared across the glass still legible. Chapter 6 has already begun. He didn't remember returning here. He didn't remember anything between the throne and now. The last coherent memory was the face of the husk, his own face, smiling from that impossible seat beneath the lake bed. And now, this. The room behind him hadn't changed, and yet it had. The lamp on the nightstand still glowed faintly, casting long shadows that didn't line up with the shape of the furniture. The bed still held the impression of a body. Kara sighed, but the blankets hadn't been moved in hours, maybe days. The floor was littered with old motel brochures that had aged a decade and a night, their edges curled and yellowing. The entire room smelled faintly of wet earth and burnt wood. Ethan moved toward the door. When he opened it, the hallway outside was not the hallway he remembered. It was longer, much longer, and it sloped downward. Carpet gave way to stone, wallpaper peeled into bark, light bulbs flickered into fireflies embedded in the ceiling like stars. The walls pulsed with the slow rhythm of breath. At the far end was a single wooden elevator door. The spiral was not done with him yet. He stepped forward. Each pace was slower, heavier, like walking through syrup. Somewhere, impossibly distant, he heard Kara's voice. Not a scream, not a cry for help, a laugh. Short, gentle, like she'd just been told a good joke. He moved faster. The hallway shifted behind him, closing in. Roots pushed through the walls like veins. The fireflies dimmed one by one as he reached the elevator. He didn't push a button. He didn't need to. The doors opened on their own. Inside was a man, not the husk, not a stranger. Sheriff Dallas, but not quite. His badge was rusted over, his hat gone, his right eye missing. But he smiled as if they were old friends at a town bar. Been waiting, Dallas rasped, the voice thick with mildew and time. Always knew you'd come this far. Ethan stepped in. You're dead. The sheriff shrugged. Ain't that the trick? Everyone down here's dead, but some of us remember it. The doors closed. The elevator began to descend. Through roots, through bedrock, through the skeletal ribs of something ancient. "I saw Kara," Ethan said quietly. Dallas nodded. "We all did. She wasn't right. Neither were any of us after that spring thaw of '74. You're just the first to listen long enough to hear the real version of events." "What was it? What happened to this place?" The elevator creaked. Roots slithered past the walls like snakes in molasses. "Cold Hollow didn't die when the water came," Dallas said. "It shifted. The townsfolk made it happen. Thought they could bury something by drowning it. But you can't drown a root. It just grows downward. And Kara, she was the bloom. You were the seed." The elevator stopped. The doors opened into what once must have been a church, now cracked and splintered, turned upside down so the steeple plunged into the earth like a spike. Stained glass windows were inverted, saints weeping black tears, their halos cracked with rot. A congregation of figures waited inside. They were not people, they wore faces, but not their own, stretched over elongated heads like masks, stitched at the temples. They knelt in rows, heads bowed toward the altar. At the center stood Kara, alive, or something that resembled her. Her skin was paler than he remembered, her hair longer, darker, draped in a veil of moss and frost. Her eyes had no whites left, just two orbs of reflective black, like still water on a windless night. "Ethan," she said softly, not with her mouth, but in his mind. He staggered forward. "Why?" he whispered. Kara raised her hands. In them, the journal, the one Ethan thought had burned, drowned, vanished, sat pristine. Its pages fluttered open without wind, and across the parchment, ink began to write itself in real time. Lines, loops, symbols, spirals. She stepped closer. "You never stopped writing," she said, voice echoing now from the church walls themselves. "Every memory, every fear, every lie you told yourself, that journal fed on it." He stared at the ink. The shapes on the page matched the mark on his arm, and it was no longer just ink. It was his blood, dripping down the edge of the page, a slow crimson spiral. "You wrote me into this," Kara said. "I wanted to save you. You wanted to control the ending." Ethan looked around. The congregation began to hum, low and harmonic like a choir of insects. Kara lifted the journal high. "We can finish it," she said. "Together." He stepped forward, shaking, then stopped. Behind the altar, something shifted. A massive silhouette, half hidden in the shadows. Horned, root-bound, breathing. The source. The devourer, not a god, not a demon, a mirror of every story ever told wrong. And Ethan realized the spiral never ends. You just find yourself closer to the center. The journal snapped shut. Everything went black. The first thing Ethan felt was cold, not biting, not sharp, but ancient. It filled him from the inside out, as if his own memories had turned to frost. There was no floor beneath his feet, no light, no body, only a falling sensation, and the sense that something was watching him from within. Then, sound, not noise, not voices. A story, his own voice, telling it. He was in a library, though not one he recognized. It stretched infinitely in all directions, a cosmic archive filled not with books, but with spirals carved into stone tablets, each one spinning slowly on its pedestal. The air shimmered with whispers. Each spiral hummed with a memory, a life, a lie. Ethan stood at the center, no longer wearing his clothes, but wrapped in the pages of his journal, etched directly into his skin. His arms, his chest, even his face bore looping script, some lines smeared, others fresh and bleeding. Kara stood opposite him, now fully transformed into something half human, half myth. Moss curled from her hair. Her feet left no mark on the stone. She no longer needed to speak aloud. "Every story has a price," she said in his head, "and you wrote mine in ink you never earned. I didn't mean to, but you did. That's the horror, Ethan. That's what they all forget. The spiral doesn't punish intention, it punishes authorship. Behind her, the congregation from the upside-down church filed in silently. Their faces were shifting now, flashing between the townspeople of Cold Hollow, the figures from his dreams, reflections of himself, versions of Kara from every ending he had imagined but never lived. "You stole agency," Kara whispered. "You told the world how it ended, before it was even over." Ethan stepped back. His foot brushed one of the stone spirals, and a memory exploded behind his eyes. Kara in college, laughing on a bridge. Kara screaming from inside a coffin buried in mud. Kara at the diner, staring through the window long after he'd left. Kara in his arms, saying, "It's not your job to fix me." Kara drowning beneath the frozen lake, looking up at him, the real her, the forgotten her. His knees buckled. He fell forward. "You came looking for a horror story," Kara said, kneeling beside him. "But horror isn't just what's done to us. It's what we do to others when we think we're the hero." The spirals began to spin faster now, orbiting them both, voices rising. Some shouted, some wept, some told stories he had never written, never read. The figure in the shadows, the devourer, emerged behind the stone shelves, its antlers scraping the ceiling of stars. Its eyes were keyholes, its chest a typewriter that clacked with every heartbeat. It towered over Ethan. "You are the author," Kara said. "You are the altar." The devourer opened its mouth. Inside was a blank page. Ethan screamed, but no sound came, only ink. The congregation chanted, louder. The library cracked and bled light. Kara pressed her hand to Ethan's chest. "You can end it," she said, "not by escaping, not by surviving, by rewriting." He looked down. In his hands was the journal again, but this time the pages were not filled. Only one remained, blank, waiting. Behind him the devourer roared, and it wasn't angry. It was hungry. Ethan gritted his teeth, raised the pen that had always been his, and wrote, "I am not the author anymore." The page turned black. The spirals shattered. Everything fell inward. Then, light. A motel room. Static on a TV. Ethan bolted upright, gasping. He was in room 7 again. The air was still. The sun rising faintly beyond the window. The smell of pine and frost was gone. The carpet was normal. The mirror was unbroken. There was no blood on his face. A knock came at the door. He turned. For one horrible second he expected Kara's silhouette, or the devourer, or himself. Instead, a woman in a motel uniform. Blonde. Human. "You all right in there?" she asked. "Checkout's at 11. Ethan blinked. "What time is it?" 7:17. He almost laughed. "What day?" She frowned. "Thursday, hun." Ethan sat in stunned silence. The woman lingered, but finally walked away. He got up, checked the bathroom. No blood, no carvings, just steam on the mirror. He picked up his bag, lighter than it should have been, and found the journal. It's still there, all pages blank. He hesitated, then, for the first time in what felt like years, he opened to the first page and wrote, "Cold Hollow is a place that remembers what we try to forget." He closed the journal. Outside the day was gray but warm. He stepped out into it, the gravel crunching under his boots. And on the distant horizon, in the shape of the tree line, a spiral of birds took flight, vanishing into sky. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you made it out of Cold Hollow with your memories still intact, consider yourself lucky. Most don't. This story was never just about monsters in the dark, but about the ones we create when we rewrite the truth, over and over, until we forget who we really are. To those of you listening in silence, in the late hours of the night, or alone in your car, this story now belongs to you. And maybe, just maybe, the spiral is still turning, waiting for your name. If this tale left a mark, A whisper, a chill, a question. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that twist beneath the surface. Until next time, keep the lights on. And whatever you do, don't look in the mirror too long.